Howdy, folks. We're going to talk about manganese. We've got the highest grade manganese deposit in North America, and our strategy is to be producing high purity manganese products for the North American sector with a focus on high purity manganese sulphate monohydrate for the electric vehicle battery sector. We're going to go through a little bit of manganese for those people who don't know much about the manganese market, and then we'll go through the company as well. From a manganese perspective, maybe you don't know that it's the fourth most used metal on the planet, behind copper, aluminum, and iron. It's 90% of it goes into making steel and metal alloys. We're going to be focused on the battery market, but I also want to let you know that we're not ignoring all these other markets. From a fertilizer perspective or animal feed, wastewater treatment, when you're walking by the wastewater treatment plant and it doesn't smell, that's because they're using permanganate, which is a manganese product. Of the lithium-ion batteries that are being used in electric vehicles, 60% of those battery chemistries are using manganese. From a chemistry perspective, Americans have range anxiety. They want to go 300 miles on a charge, even though they might drive 5 miles a day. They're concerned about cold weathers impacting on their batteries, and therefore manganese battery chemistries are what you need because it gives it a much higher battery density. Here's a chart on the manganese demand by various chemistries. Plus 600% increase in manganese battery chemistry demand. From a high purity manganese sulphate monohydrate demand, this is the chemistry that goes into the cathode part of the battery. Very large demand forecast there. I want to take a look at a bit of the supply chain. Typically, you're going to get manganese ores from Africa. They're going to be shipped, not flown, over to China using hydrocarbon-based fuels. 96% of high purity manganese sulphate monohydrate in the world is produced in China. There's only 2 plants outside of China at the moment that are producing HPMSM. One's in Belgium, one's in Japan. It gets produced and it gets sent back to the US for battery manufacturers. If we talk about the other high purity manganese products like high purity electrolytic manganese metal, there's only 1 metal plant outside of China, that's in South Africa. And so the Chinese control maybe 98% of that market. Why does domestic supply matter? National security is the big one. We just talked about how plus 95% of the high purity manganese products are controlled by Chinese production, and not necessarily that we what the ABC that was mentioned early, anything but China. Not necessarily that, but you don't ever want to have one supplier that is such a dominant supplier for you. Economic stability, we saw that supply chain diagram from the perspective of shipping that manganese ore over to China, having it processed and shipped back to the US. I'll show you a slide shortly about where the Emily deposit is in relation to some of the battery plants that are on stream. Environmental concerns, we've got better environmental regulations here in the US than some of the other countries that are being produced. So on a global basis, we would have better environmental requirements. Here's the interesting chart of currently the 33 North American battery initiatives that are going on. You can see Emily right there in the red dot, kind of very centrally located. From a supply perspective, any one of those battery manufacturers would love to be able to say that they're sourcing 100% of their high purity manganese sulphate monohydrate from the US. So, you take a look at the demand from there, and you look at the location of the Emily deposit, and it's pretty easy to see that it's almost a no-brainer. We'll have a little bit of discussion on the company. As I mentioned before, we are really focused initially on the high purity manganese sulphate monohydrate for the electric vehicle battery sector, but we're not ignoring the other sectors. As I mentioned before, we've got the highest grade manganese deposit in North America. We're 2 times higher than our next comparable or next competitor. That would be the EMUSF project that South 32 has in Arizona. That's their Clark deposit, which is their second development project, which is probably out 7-ish years. From a production perspective, we're looking at maybe a 300,000 to 500,000 ton a year underground mine, which in the grand scheme of things is not a big mine. It's, if you compare it to a coal mine, maybe a mid-sized coal mine. It'd be big enough to have a positive impact on the local community, but not so big that it overwhelms it. From a location perspective, we've got great infrastructure. We're probably 40 miles north and south to a rail spur. We're maybe a couple-hour drive over to Duluth, which gives us access to the Great Lakes. And so from an infrastructure perspective, we're very well suited. Compelling industry dynamics that we just talked about earlier. If you if you believe that the electric vehicle are going to be taken up, whether you believe that we're going to have 100% electric vehicles in the next 10 years or not, there are electric vehicles that are going to be bought and produced. That's going to create demand for batteries, and that's going to create substantial demand for high purity manganese sulphate monohydrate. Again, from a project location perspective, we've got all the things that we need within Minnesota: access to the ports, to power, the major highways and railroads. We're about a 2-hour drive from Minneapolis. Taking you back in time a little bit, 1.7 billion years ago, the world had a different climate, so a little bit of climate change. Basically what happened was there's all the chemistry was substantially different. Back about 1.7 billion years ago, we had about 10% of the oxygen that we have now. And we had the stromatolites, which were creating oxygen. It changed the chemistry in the water. Minnesota back in the day was a beach. And so what happened was the manganese and the iron under that certain chemistry was allowed to precipitate out, and that's how the Emily deposit was formed. From a historic perspective, it was actually discovered by Pickens Mather Mining Company in the 1940s and further drilled by U.S. Steel, and they produced an open pit mine plan in 1959. They decided not to develop Emily because the Mesabi Iron Range was becoming the place to be, and U.S. Steel went and developed the Mintac iron ore mine, which is, I think, probably produced maybe 60% of the United States iron. So that's why they didn't develop Emily at that point in time. From a resource footprint, we took a page from the U.S. Steel mine plan. We went back and we drilled some more holes last year, and we've created the resource that we published on Friday. If you look in the upper left, there's 2 drill holes up there that has some very high grade manganese intercepts, plus 40-50% manganese. But we're going to be focused down there in the red area. We're currently in the process of putting together a new drill program because we want to get from where we are now to a feasibility study just as quickly as possible. I think someone mentioned a lifestyle CEO. I guarantee I'm not interested in a lifestyle CEO. I want to get this thing built, producing manganese and getting an HPMSM plant up and running just as quickly as we possibly can. Here's our 43-101 resource at the moment. According to the 43-101 rules, I can't take the metric tons at 10% average grade and a 19% manganese grade and combine them with the indicated and give you an idea what the total average is. But from a 300,000 ton to a 500,000 ton a year mine, we're potentially looking at on the order of a minimum 20 years, potentially 50 years or more of a mine life. From a metallurgical test work, There's been a lot of historic work that's been done on this particular project. We have produced electrolytic manganese metal in the lab. We produced electrolytic manganese dioxide and then the manganese carbonate. That's more the fertilizer type product. And then we're currently working with Cometco Research, who does a lot of metallurgical research for the manganese markets. And we're pretty close to producing within spec HPMSM. Hopefully within the next month, we'll get the word back that we're meeting all those specs. From a phase development perspective, like I said, we're in the process of developing a drill program to get us to a mine plan just as quickly as humanly possible. We've got all the disciplines in the room from a permitting perspective: geologists, mining engineers, metallurgical, the legal guys. We want to use some artificial intelligence to assist in I'll say optimizing the drill spacing, so that we can understand, number one, how to reduce the cost, but number two, how to get that optimal drill spacing to get all the information that we want to get so that we can get to that mine plan. The key takeaways from a perspective of the green energy transition, it's happening, it's going to happen, and it isn't going to happen without manganese. From a perspective of, we've got an experienced management team, and I would say experienced and driven management team to get this thing up and going just as quickly as humanly possible. Highest grade manganese deposited in North America. Our nearest comparable, we're 2x that nearest comparable. So that gives us some very good strategic advantage. We are going to build an HPMSM plant. And we're also trading near historic lows, so now's a great time to be jumping in. Just a bit of a corporate snapshot here on who our board is. We actually issued an announcement this morning that we have 2 additional board members that could be joining us when we get our AGM out the door. Quentin Henney and Tyson Hall, 2 very, very prominent guys in the mining sector. And if you've got any questions, happy to take them.
I just have a question. There is also a few companies which are trying to get manganese into the supply chain through recycling. What's your view on that, if any? Thank you.
Yeah, from a recycling perspective through the battery side, Recyclico, actually that was American Manganese. They were trying to get a lower grade manganese deposit going, and they converted themselves into recycling. I think eventually you might get some manganese, but it's not going to be a huge portion of the supply. Thank you.